And for more on these tariffs, I can welcome Maxime Darmet, who is a senior economist for the United States, France and United Kingdom with the Allianz Group. Good morning, Maxime, and thank you for joining us. Donald Trump is claiming victory with these tariffs. Can they in reality be considered a victory for anyone?
No, I think everyone stands to lose from tariffs. So the first impacted economy will be obviously the US, right? We're already seeing in the US companies squeezing their margins to absorb the cost of tariffs. So for now, they are not really passing on the cost onto the consumer yet. They have decided to really take the hit on the margins, which is true, has been pretty high over the past couple of years. US margins, US profit margin, pretty high. But I think very soon we're going to see really sharp price increases in the US. So the US consumers are going to start to pay the cost of tariffs. Why? Because now businesses have more certainty over the level of tariffs. We know it's going to be 15% on the EU, 15% on Japan, pretty much 25-50% price on India. It's not entirely clear. So now that we have more certainty on the level of tariffs, I think it's time now for companies to start to pass on the cost onto the consumer. So the US clearly is the first impacted economy, but also here in Europe and in the rest of the world, again, everybody stands to lose. In Europe, what's going to happen? I think in the next couple of months, next couple of quarters, we're going to see export losses. So a decline of exports toward the US, which is a really huge market for many countries, including Germany, and I'm not even speaking of the likes of Ireland, Netherlands, even France to some extent. So we're going to see a decline of exports in countries in Europe which have already very low growth. So it's really a big blow for many nations, especially in Europe. Last but not least, you have a lot of Chinese goods now which are no longer exported to the US because basically tariffs on Chinese products are super high, super steep. So we're seeing a collapse in trade flows from China to the United States. But we can be concerned that part of this flow is going to, find its way in other markets. So the Chinese are going to start to basically send their shipments, basically the goods they have not been able to sell to the US, send to Europe. So we could see a flooding of cheap Chinese exports into third markets, not only in Europe, but also in other emerging markets, in Africa, in India, and so on and so forth. So lots of people are going to lose from this trade war.
And one of the main aims of tariffs for Trump is to force US and also foreign companies to reshore, i.e. moving manufacturing and possibly services back to the United States. How effective is this likely to be?
I'm very skeptical, to be honest. I'm very skeptical it's going to work. First of all, in 3-4 year time, President Trump will be gone. And businesses, when they make decisions, they look ahead, they plan ahead. So, okay, in 5 year times, maybe the tariffs are going to go back down. So why would I invest in the US? Why I would reshore in the US? So first, this is the first argument. Second argument, even though we got super high tariffs on low-cost manufacturing hubs, such as Vietnam, such as Malaysia, India, and so on, it remains advantageous to produce in these countries. You're never going to produce low value-added goods, textile, household appliances, for instance. You're never going to produce them in the US. There's no way. The cost advantage remains really, really much higher if you produce in Vietnam. Labor cost in Vietnam is only 5% of US labor cost. So even if you get a 40%, 30% tariff, it still remains, more advantageous for a company to produce in Vietnam and to export your good to the US, right? So although we could say maybe a couple of sectors, so we could see some resharing. I think of pharmaceuticals, automotives, and perhaps semiconductors. So on these products, tariffs are super high. They tend to be produced by countries which have more or less the same level of development than the US, such as European countries, Japan. So it could be the case that we're going to see some reshoring. So some companies starting to increase production for these specific products into the United States at the expense of Europe, Japan, and Korea potentially. But overall, I don't think we're going to see massive reshoring. And a last argument why I'm very skeptical about the potential for reshoring in the United States is the lack of labor. You got massive labor shortages in the US. You got massive skills shortages in the US. I don't see how they're going to find all these people, all these skills to produce the goods that they're importing.
Now, some of Trump's tariffs have not been particularly surgical. They affect, for instance, raw materials, commodities and parts, as well as actual finished products themselves, which means that even companies that do produce in the United States are affected by the tariffs. What are the particular products that actually consumers might actually forego in the event of price rises? Because certain things obviously people can't afford to forego, but there obviously will be some things that will obviously see sales drop.
Yes, it's a good point. Probably textile, so all the stuff which are not, necessary for the. I mean, you can really cut down your expenses. Maybe a bit less cars. I expect the car sales to drop in the US because all the Korean-made, Japanese-made, European-made, UK-made cars, the cost is going to be much, much higher from now on. To some extent, also household appliances. We're going to see, I think, a drop in volumes to some extent, but there's only so much consumers are going to cut down. The price is going to be higher for sure. The volumes are going to be lower. But for companies, as you said quite rightly, the cost of inputs is much higher now. Let's say you want to produce a factory in the US. That's great. You want to reshore into the US. The thing is steel and aluminum, which are two key inputs to build a factory. The cost is much higher in the US than in the rest of the world. And the labor wages are super high in the US, so it's not going to be very, very super cost advantageous to produce there. So yeah, we could see really a reshaping of consumption patterns, I would say.
Now, the US economy is holding up for now, as you said earlier, despite the warnings of many economists. Now, there may be a delayed effect, and you imagine that if prices go up, so will inflation.
Yeah, so the two things. The US economy has been holding up in the first semester of 2025. That's true, but we are really seeing things cracking down a little bit, right? So investment is starting to soften quite noticeably. Consumer spending as well. So under the surface, clearly, the US economy is slowing down. We expect growth of 1.6% this year, which is very low for US standards. Last year, the US economy was growing 2.8%. So this is really a step down in terms of growth. And as you said, we haven't seen the price effect of the tariff yet. It is too soon. For now, as I was saying, US-based companies and US retailers have been squeezing onto their margins. So they have been absorbing the cost of tariffs into their margins because they were not really certain about the set level of tariffs. But now that we know pretty much what's going to happen, but we know pretty much how much tariff we're going to pay for the next 3 or 4 years, now they're going to start to pass on the price into the consumer. So I think by the end of this year, US consumer prices, US inflation, is going to pick up from currently 2.7% to close to 4%. So quite a shock. The consumer is going to feel the pinch. And obviously what it means for the economy is going to mean lower consumer spending. And in the US, consumer spending is about 70 to 80% of GDP. So this is a bulk of GDP consumer spending. So clearly, I think the second semester of 25 and the first semester of 26 are going to be pretty harsh for the US economy. It's going to be super low growth. And we cannot rule out also the risk of a recession. This is not our baseline. We think there's still a lot of resilience and good fundamentals in the US. It remains a massive ups for technology and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, risks are clearly to the downside. And growth is going to be very soft, I think, for the next couple of quarters, perhaps between 0.5 and 1.5% annualized. So this is very, very soft for US standards and really, really softer what we used to have over the past 4 or 5 years, where growth was, hovering between 2.5 and 3% per year.
Thank you very much for that, Maxime Darmet, Senior Economist with the Allianz Group.
Thank you.